They used to call me the ugly graduate. The words burned into my memory like scars I couldn't erase. I was 17, wearing an oversized gown, clutching my diploma with shaky hands, and listening to my parents whisper behind me, thinking I couldn't hear. "She doesn't reflect well on us," my father said to a colleague over the phone. "At least Sarah will make up for it. She's the jewel of the family." I'll never forget how he paused and added, almost with disgust, "Lucy, well, she didn't inherit the good genes." That night, the humiliation crushed me more than the acne on my face or the braces on my teeth ever could. I confronted them, trembling, waiting for reassurance. Instead, I was told directly, "You simply don't fit into our plans." My mother didn't argue, didn't defend me. She just looked away. That was the moment I realized I had no place in my own family. I left that very night. No one stopped me. No one called the next day. By the end of the month, my cousin told me I'd been cut out of the will. To them, I was gone, erased, an embarrassment to sweep under the rug. At first, I thought I'd die from a loneliness. I worked night shifts, took classes during the day, and stared at the mirror until I stopped recognizing the sad girl they had broken. Slowly, piece by piece, I rebuilt myself. My acne cleared, the braces came off, and I swapped my thick glasses for lenses. But more importantly, I built a business. A financial consulting company, one that, with bitter irony, ended up advising some of my father's competitors. 10 years later, I thought I had buried all. Until one morning, an envelope with gold lettering appeared on my desk. An invitation. My sister Sarah's wedding. My parents' pride and joy marrying into one of the wealthiest families in the city. And for reasons I couldn't quite explain, I knew I had to go. For 3 weeks, that invitation sat on my desk, staring at me like a challenge. Every time I passed it, I felt a tug-of-war inside me. Part of me wanted to tear it to shreds, the same way they had torn me from their lives. Another part whispered, "Go, show them who you've become." I didn't want reconciliation. I didn't crave their acceptance anymore. But justice, yes, I wanted that. Justice in the form of walking into that wedding not as the ugly graduate they had mocked, but as the woman they could never break. The day of the wedding, I slipped into a fitted red dress that hugged my body in all the right places. Subtle but powerful makeup highlighted the features my family had once sneered at. My jewelry was simple, elegant. Success didn't need to scream. It whispered confidently. When I arrived at the hotel ballroom, heads turned. Guests I didn't know eyed me with curiosity, whispering, "Who is she?" No one recognized me. Not my mother with her frosted hair and pearls, not my father with his stiff smile, not even Sarah, dressed in lace and diamonds, glowing in her carefully curated spotlight. I stayed in the shadows during the ceremony, watching her beam as Michael, her rich fiancé, looked at her as though she were perfection itself. I didn't feel envy. Instead, I felt something sharper, an anticipation building like static electricity. When the reception began, I knew it was time. The moment I'd been waiting for. I walked through the crowd, heels clicking softly against marble, toward the main table where Sarah and Michael were receiving congratulations. Her eyes landed on me and widened. "Lucy," she whispered, almost choking on the name she hadn't spoken in a decade. Michael frowned, glancing between us. "Do you know her?" I smiled, letting the weight of 10 years settle in my voice. "More than you think." The silence that followed my words was thick enough to choke on. Sarah's hand, still clutching Michael's, trembled. For a brief moment, I almost pitied her, almost. Michael looked bewildered. "Wait, who is she?" I leaned in slightly, never breaking eye contact with my sister. "I'm her older sister." Gasps rippled through the nearby guests. A murmur traveled across the room, like wildfire. Older sister? Some even turned to my parents for confirmation. And there they were, walking briskly toward us, panic written across their faces. "Lucy," my father said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "What an unexpected surprise. We didn't know if you'd come." His voice had that polished, calculated tone he always used in boardrooms when a deal slipped from his control. I tilted my head, amused. Of course I'd come. After all, family is the most important thing. Isn't that what you always said, Dad? A muscle in his jaw twitched. My mother, clearly unsettled, hugged me mechanically as if cameras were watching. "You look different," she said, eyes scanning me from head to toe. The realization hit her. Gone was the awkward girl with acne and braces. In her place stood a woman she could no longer dismiss. 10 years can change a person, I replied smoothly. Especially when that person has to rebuild her life from nothing. The hint landed exactly where I wanted it to. Michael, still trying to process, extended his hand politely. It's a pleasure to meet you, Lucy. I didn't know Sarah had a sister. Of course you didn't, I said with a small smile. There are many things about the Martinez family you still don't know. Sarah's face drained of color. Her eyes pleaded silently with me. Don't do this. Not here. But I wasn't here to play nice. I thought you left by choice, Sarah whispered sharply, her smile frozen for the guests. I chuckled under my breath. Choice? Is that what they told you? That I simply walked away? I let my voice drop just enough for Michael and the few surrounding guests to hear. No, Sarah. They disowned me. Because your father thought an ugly graduate would tarnish his precious image. The words hit like shattered glass. My father's smile faltered. My mother's pearls seemed to rattle against her chest. Michael blinked, stunned. He called you that. I looked him squarely in the eye. Oh yes, his exact words. And I'll never forget them. Gasps grew louder. A group of distant cousins whispered furiously, and even some of Michael's relatives leaned in, intrigued by the drama unfolding before them. My father's voice turned to steel. This is neither the time nor the place, Lucy. It's your sister's special day. Of course, I said sweetly. I wouldn't dream of ruining another family celebration. I already had enough with my own graduation. His face went pale. He hadn't expected me to recall his exact phrasing. He hadn't expected me to be here at all. I gave Sarah one last look, watching her squirm under the weight of truth, and then I stepped back into the crowd, leaving them shaken in my wake. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. I walked away slowly, savoring the heat of their stares burning into my back. Each step I took toward the bar was deliberate, measured. Let them watch. Let them wonder. For 10 years they had erased me. Now I had become unforgettable. The bartender raised an eyebrow when I ordered champagne. Celebrating, he asked casually. I gave him a faint smile. Something like that. As I sipped the sparkling liquid, I watched the room from a distance. The perfect fairy tale they had staged was starting to crack. My parents huddled near Sarah and Michael, whispering furiously, trying to contain the damage. Guests began glancing my way, curious, some even daring to approach me with polite smiles. Who is she? Their eyes seemed to ask. One man in particular caught my attention. Dark suit, sharp gaze, a calm confidence that stood out among the crowd. He approached with a glass in hand. Impressive entrance, he said, his voice smooth, deliberate. He offered me a toast. Gabriel Vega. The name hit me with recognition. Michael's business partner. I'd read about him in real estate articles. Young, ambitious, a rising force in the city. Lucy Martinez, I replied, clinking my glass against his. Older sister of the bride. The one no one talks about. His brow arched slightly, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. Interesting. I worked with your father years ago. Let's just say we didn't part on the best terms. So I wasn't the only one carrying scars from Edward Martinez. I smirked. Then you know exactly what kind of man he is. Gabriel studied me for a moment, as though trying to piece together the missing puzzle. I sense there's a story behind your absence. A story of toxic family and impossible expectations, I answered simply. But tonight isn't about the past. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. On the contrary, sometimes the past has a way of rewriting the present. Before I could respond, the master of ceremonies announced the newlyweds' first dance. Everyone drifted toward the dance floor. Sarah glided across in her gown, smiling that flawless smile she had perfected all her life. Michael held her as if she were made of glass. To the world, they looked like a fairy tale. To me, it looked like a stage play, and I knew the truth behind the curtains. As the song played, I felt my parents' eyes dart toward me every few seconds, their smiles tight, their laughter forced. They wanted me gone. They wanted their skeletons safely locked away again. But I wasn't leaving. Not until they faced everything they had done. And Gabriel Vega, standing quietly beside me, seemed like he might just become an unexpected ally. The applause thundered as Sarah and Michael finished their first dance, her veil floating like she was some celestial being. Cameras flashed, guests sighed with envy, and yet all I could think was how carefully orchestrated it all felt. My family had always been good at putting on shows, glittering illusions to hide their rotting foundation. I stayed near the bar watching. The more champagne I sipped, the clearer everything became. They were terrified of me. My father's jaw was clenched, his usual businesslike charm now cracking at the edges. My mother had that stiff, frozen smile, the one she wore whenever a deal threatened to slip away. But Sarah? She looked cornered. Her eyes kept darting toward me, pleading, warning, begging me not to expose her little world. It was almost satisfying, knowing that after all her years of perfection, I now held the power. "Careful," Gabriel murmured beside me, his eyes still fixed on the couple. "You're enjoying this a little too much." I smirked. "Wouldn't you?" He chuckled, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Maybe, but I've learned the sweetest revenge is patience. Let them unravel themselves." I tilted my head, studying him. There was a sharpness in his tone that told me he wasn't merely observing for entertainment. He wanted something too. "Tell me, Gabriel," I said softly, "why exactly didn't things end well between you and my father?" His lips curved into a cold smile. "Let's just say he doesn't like partners he can't control." That sounded painfully familiar. Before I could push further, the speeches began. One of Michael's relatives raised a glass, praising Sarah's beauty, her elegance, her bright future as a perfect wife. The room erupted in approval. Then it was my father's turn. He stood tall, holding his champagne like a trophy, his voice carrying that same rehearsed authority he used in every boardroom. "Dear friends and family," he began, "today is one of the happiest days of my life. To see my daughter Sarah, my pride and joy, marry such a distinguished young man, well, it fills my heart with gratitude." I nearly choked on my drink. Pride and joy. Always Sarah. Always the perfect one. His speech continued, littered with cliches about family values, strength, legacy. My hands tightened around the glass as anger bubbled in my chest. How dare he stand there, celebrating family, when he had thrown me away like garbage? The words slipped out before I could stop them. "Tell them the rest, Dad." The room fell into silence. Heads turned. My father froze mid-sentence, his eyes locking on me. I set my glass down and rose from my chair, my voice steady but sharp enough to cut through the quiet. "Tell them how you disowned your first daughter. How you called me the ugly graduate. How I wasn't good enough to be part of this family's perfect image." Gasps erupted. Someone dropped a fork. Sarah's face turned ashen, and Michael looked like he had been slapped. "This isn't the time," my father hissed, trying to maintain control. "Oh, it's the perfect time," I countered. "Because for 10 years, you pretended I didn't exist. And tonight, everyone deserves to know the truth." The ballroom buzzed with whispers. Cameras shifted from the bride and groom to me, recording every word. My father's carefully constructed empire of appearances was cracking, right here in front of the city's elite. I glanced at Sarah, who looked seconds away from fainting. For the first time, the golden child's mask was slipping. And I wasn't done yet. The silence after my words stretched like a wire, ready to snap. All around me, guests leaned in, their curiosity outweighing their manners. Michael's family in particular stared at my father, their polished smiles faltering. My father tried to recover. "Lucy is exaggerating. She left on her own accord." I laughed, soft bitter, enough to make the hairs on people's necks rise. "Left? No, you pushed me out. I heard you on the phone that night, remember? An ugly graduate doesn't reflect well on the family business." "Your words, not mine." Gasps again. My father's face turned red, but he kept his corporate composure. "This is Sarah's wedding, not your stage." "Funny," I replied coolly, "because you made my graduation your stage. You made me your punchline." Michael's brow furrowed. He turned to Sarah, his voice low but audible. "You never told me any of this." Sarah's lips trembled. She opened her mouth, then shut it, her perfect composure shattering. She looked at me with raw desperation, as if begging me to stop, but I stood taller, letting the truth echo. My mother tried her turn at damage control. She reached for my hand, her grip icy. "Lucy, please." Not here. I pulled away. Not here. Then when? 10 years you left me out in the cold. 10 years of silence, not one call, not one apology. You erased me from a family will, from the photos, from conversations, as if I had died. People shifted uncomfortably. Some avoided eye contact, others couldn't look away. Michael finally stood, his voice tight with confusion. Sarah, you told me you didn't have siblings. Her face crumbled. I didn't think it mattered. It matters, he shot back. His family's eyes were on her now, judgment heavy. I felt a sharp, dark satisfaction at the unraveling. For once, Sarah wasn't the untouchable princess. She was exposed. Enough, my father barked. The mask had finally cracked, his voice rising above the murmurs. Lucy left because she couldn't handle responsibility. She was always weak, always disappointing. I smiled. Calm, razor-edged. Weak. I built my own company from scratch. I advise corporations you could only dream of touching. Some of them are your competitors, Dad. I'm the consultant who helped them beat you in bids. The silence shattered into sharp whispers. Even Michael's father leaned forward, intrigued. My father's face turned to stone. He hadn't expected that revelation. 10 years ago, you said the world didn't need me. I continued, my voice steady. But it turns out the world did. Just not you. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. Not because of me, but because his carefully crafted image was slipping through his fingers. And then Gabriel Vega, still at the bar, lifted his glass toward me with a quiet smile. An unspoken acknowledgement, you just drew blood. But I knew this battle was far from over. The ballroom had transformed into a theater of tension. Conversations that were once light and polite had turned into frantic whispers, eyes darting between me and my family, as if they were watching the final act of a play they hadn't paid for. Michael's mother stood suddenly, her voice sharp. Edward, is this true? Did you really cut your daughter out of your life because of her looks? The room froze again. My father's face hardened, his lips pressed into a thin line. This is not the place for private matters. On the contrary, I said softly, stepping closer to the center. It's exactly the place. Because you built your empire on appearances. You cared more about how your family looked than how we lived. Michael looked torn, his hand running through his hair. He glanced between Sarah and me, then finally faced her. Why didn't you ever tell me the truth? Sarah sobbed quietly, her mascara streaking her cheeks. Because I was afraid. Afraid that if you knew, you'd see me differently. He shook his head. I do see you differently. Right now. The weight of his words struck her harder than anything I could have said. Meanwhile, Gabriel Vega, still watching with that calm intensity, stepped beside me, his voice carrying enough authority to silence the room. I can confirm Lucy's story. I worked with Edward Martinez years ago. He didn't care about loyalty, only image. He cut people out of deals, ruined reputations, all for his pride. His gaze flicked to me briefly. And apparently, even his own blood wasn't safe. The ripple of murmurs grew into something louder, judgment, disbelief, outrage. Some of Michael's relatives exchanged looks that screamed, we've made a mistake tying ourselves to this family. For the first time, my father looked cornered. His empire of charm and intimidation was crumbling in real time. His face flushed red, veins at his temples throbbing. Enough. You think dragging our private affairs into the open makes you righteous? You're nothing, Lucy. You'll always be nothing. I smiled, slow, deliberate, unshaken. Then why are you trembling, Dad? The silence after that cut deeper than any scream. My father's hand shook as he lowered his glass, his facade finally slipping away. And in that moment I realized this was no longer about revenge. It was about liberation. For the first time, I wasn't the ugly graduate, the forgotten daughter, the erased shadow. I was the storm that broke their illusion, and they had no place to hide. The silence lingered after my words, hanging heavy in the ballroom like a storm that had just passed but left the air electric. My father's hand trembled against his glass. My mother sat stiff, her pearls quivering on her chest with each shallow breath. Sarah was a crumpled image of the perfect bride, her mascara smeared, her veil slipping, her golden facade shattered. And me? For the first time in 10 years, I felt weightless. Michael spoke, his voice sharp and steady. I deserve honesty in a marriage, Sarah. Not lies. Not illusions. If you can erase your sister, what else are you capable of hiding? Sarah's sobs grew louder. I didn't mean to erase her. I just wanted to be the daughter they were proud of. I stepped closer, not cruelly, but with a calmness I had earned through a decade of fire. And you thought their pride was worth my life? My pain? You didn't just stay silent. You thrived in their silence. You were complicit. The guests stirred, uncomfortable. Some looked away, others whispered furiously. Michael's parents exchanged cold glances with each other, clearly reconsidering the union their son had just entered. My father, desperate to salvage something, finally snapped. You think you're victorious, Lucy? You think parading your grievances makes you powerful? You'll always be that same little girl crying because she wasn't pretty enough. I didn't flinch. I didn't shout. I simply met his rage with a smile. No, Dad. I'm the woman who survived being thrown away. I built a life you can't touch. And tonight, in front of everyone, I gave you something you can never undo, truth. Gasps echoed. Some people even applauded quietly. Gabriel Vega's voice broke the tension, firm and deliberate. And the truth is powerful, Edward. Far more powerful than image. His eyes locked with mine, and in that moment I realized I wasn't entirely alone anymore. The music had stopped. The fairy tale had ended. The spotlight was no longer on Sarah in her gown, or on my father in his suit. It was on me, the daughter they discarded, the woman who returned. I set my champagne glass down and straightened my shoulders. Enjoy the rest of your evening, I said calmly, my voice carrying through the hall. After all, it's a wedding. A celebration of family, whatever that means to you. And with that, I turned and walked away. Not defeated, not broken, but radiant in my own right. My heels clicked against the marble floor, every step echoing the freedom I had reclaimed. For years, they had called me the ugly graduate. Tonight, they finally saw me for what I truly was, the daughter they could never erase.